here today to talk about his new book. It's amazing. It just came out, so the library should have a copy soon, but hopefully he'll show you a little bit about that. But let me get my bio on him. So he's one of the premier historians of country music, internationally known scholar and writer, author, teacher, historian, songwriter, producer, executive. He's author of 25 published books and has been actively involved in the music business since 1973. So, anything, does that cover it?
Well, he sounds quite interesting. I'd like to meet him.
So I'm going to turn it over to Tom. He's going to give a presentation, and we have some time at the end. We can ask questions. So, okay. You want me to turn this down?
Yeah.
We'll wait till after you.
Okay. This is a book I wrote that's just come out. I just got it Friday. I had never, it was not on my bucket list to write a coffee table book. But when I pulled this out of the box, I was quite impressed, actually. And I thought, well, I'm glad I did that. And what it is a musical history timeline of Nashville, of the music coming out of Nashville, made in Nashville. And it covers everything. It covers, we've got a pretty rich history with black music in Nashville, a lot of people aren't aware of. Gospel music, contemporary Christian music. So I've got a little PowerPoint display that I'll show you, just to give you a brief idea of the musical wealth that you are part of, actually. One of the things that I said, and in fact, I wanted the name of the book to be the Nashville Sounds. And they said, no, we've got this whole series of books, and it has sound singular. So I said, okay, but the sounds of Nashville are much bigger than the Nashville Sound. When you hear the term Nashville Sound, it generally refers to country music of the 1960s and very early 1970s. It means several different things. Sound-wise, it means a smoother sound than that honky-tonk sound, or something different than rock and roll, which had just come in at that time. How do we get to be Music City, USA? There's never one reason for that, but it starts with the Fisk Jubilee Singers. And Fisk was started after World War II, after the Civil War, to teach former slaves how to read and write. Most were illiterate. In fact, it was illegal for slaves to be literate. And so they set up a school. They call it a university, or they call it a college, when it was really kind of rudimentary learning to read and write. They were running out of money, and so they gather a group together. The choir director got a group together of singers, and they go out and sing to raise money, and they do a pretty good job. They raise enough money to build Jubilee Hall. When you heard the term Nashville music for a long time, what it meant was Fisk Jubilee music. The interesting part of that is that they didn't start out singing the spirituals. In fact, they didn't want to sing the spirituals, because the spirituals were music of the slave past, and they wanted to wipe that away. They did not want that part of their life anymore. It was like they wanted a clean slate. It was only when the other music did not go over, they sang it very formally, it did not go over, that they started singing the spirituals, and the spirituals had never been heard by northern audiences, or really by anyone other than people who owned a large number of slaves on a plantation. They would have those church services, and so they would know the spirituals, but the public really didn't know them, and it was a new sound. So they become quite popular in Nashville during the coming years. When we get to the 1920s, 30s, 40s, Nashville's a big band town. This is the big band era. And they're big on dance bands. There are black bands, there are white bands. Some of the white band leaders, and I'm going to play you something by Francis Craig in a moment. Beasley Smith, Owen Bradley. You probably don't know these names, but they were big band stars in Nashville. Black band leaders, Don Duplin, And the singers, and these singers coming out of Nashville were nationally known. Snooky Lasson was on a thing called Your Hit Parade. It was a radio show and then a TV show every week where these 4 singers would sing the top 10 songs. It was a big deal. Dinah Shore had a show sponsored by Chevrolet. See the USA in your Chevrolet. Big deal. It was a network show. Kitty Kalin was a big band singer. So that music talent comes out of Nashville. And here's the key. 1940s laid the groundwork for Nashville becoming Music City, USA. Some of the early things that we're seeing, Acuff Rose starts. Fred Rose moves from, he was in LA, he was writing for Gene Autry. He moves back to Nashville and he gets with Roy Acuff and they form Acuff Rose Publishing. And this is the first substantial company outside of the Grand Ole Opry. And Fred Rose laid the groundwork a lot for the publishing industry in Nashville. He signs Hank Williams. This is where we get Tennessee Waltz. This is where we get Roy Orbison, Oh Pretty Woman. Tons of hit songs come out of Acuff Rose. It's no longer an independent company. It has been bought by Sony Tree or Sony ATV Tree, depending upon how you know it. Eddie Arnold does the first recording session for a major label in the studio here. It's a radio studio, and that starts his career. And then the Grand Ole Opry moves to the Ryman Auditorium. That's going to be some of the golden years of the Grand Ole Opry. This is interesting. In 1945, Nashville does not have a single studio other than radio studios, and it does not have a record label in Nashville. That's hard to believe. The city that had been basically the capital of country music, where the biggest stars were, was Chicago. It was the WLS, the National Barn Dance. It was not Nashville. Nashville had the Opry. It was important, but Chicago was basically the center. And a guy named Jim Boulay, people call him Bullet a lot, started Bullet Records. And that's our first record label. They start recording right after Christmas, around Christmas of 1945, and they start releasing records in 1946. And they record, everything's around. If you go over to Jefferson Street, that's kind of been wiped out by the interstates, a lot of that. But if you go down Jefferson Street, that was a lively place for black entertainment. We lived in a segregated society. There was a black section of town, there was a white section of town. And in the black section of town, in Atlanta, it was Sweet Auburn Street. Nashville, it was Jefferson Street. We see that all over the country, particularly in the South. So there's a lot of R&B acts there, black gospels there, white gospels there. Not white, white gospels not there, it's elsewhere, but he's recording everything. And the first studio that we have here was formed by 3 WSM engineers who start recording at a WSM radio studio, and then they create a studio in the Tulane Hotel. That's a drawing, basically, a postcard of the Tulane Hotel. It's no longer around. If you know where the old library was in Nashville, that's about where it is, and everybody's ready to tear that down. So, and that's happened in 1946. So, again, pretty late in terms of getting started here. The first million seller to come out of Nashville was not a country record. It was a pop record. It was a pop record on an independent label, not a major label. And I'm going to play it for you. It is one of the weirdest records you will ever hear because, well, it just is. It becomes a theme song for Milton Berle's show. Milton, it's like Oh, well. In 1947, Ernest Tubb was a big star in country music nationally. And he had been recording, well, the Nashville acts had started recording in Castle Studio, but the major labels weren't doing it. They were doing jingles, they were doing some smaller independent labels, Bullet Records a lot. Most of the acts, they'd go to New York to record. There was a studio in Cincinnati to record at. They'd go to Chicago. They'd go to Los Angeles. And Ernest Tubb said that he wanted to record in Nashville. And he was such a powerful artist that the guy who was the head of that division, named Paul Cohen, said, okay. And that's going to open the door for the other labels to come in and record in Nashville, because that was a stamp of approval on Castle Studio. But it was also saying, you know, we don't need to leave town. That was an incredibly important reason. Owen Bradley always cited it as the major reason Nashville became Music City, USA, was that decision by Ernest Tubb. He starts the Ernest Tubb Record Shop. It's still around today. You can go down on Broadway, maybe you have, and walk. You can walk into the store and see what's there. It has been there since 1940. It hasn't been in that location since 1947, but it's been around since 1947. So then we have the business of music. Coming out of World War II, we have you know, a huge demand for music. The country had gotten out of the Great Depression. They've got money to spend. There's jukeboxes that had bought most of the records, saved the industry during the Great Depression. And people were ready to start new companies, independent labels. But the problem was you had to press. There was no burning CDs. You had to press the records, shellac, and then later vinyl. Then you had to get them distributed. In Nashville, there were companies, again, Jim Bullet, sets up a company, a record pressing plant. That's huge. That plant is still going. It's not the exact same plant. Still pressing vinyl records here in Nashville. That was the key to Nashville being a music business center. And distributing, Coastline Distributing, where you'd get the records to the jukebox operators, to the retail outlets, so people could buy them, or jukeboxes could buy them. 1947, 1948, Eddie Arnold has the #1 record for 60 straight weeks. There's only 52 weeks in a year. It wasn't the same record. 60 straight weeks. He outsells the entire pop division of RCA, which means that they're paying a lot more attention to Nashville. This is a big deal when you make a lot of money. People want to be part of that. Wally Fowler and the All-Night Gospel Sings. I don't know how familiar you are with Southern Gospel, but that was a tradition for a long time. He starts those at the end of the 40s, and of course, this is going to be a magnet for Southern, what we call now Southern Gospel music. R&B, a lot of you don't realize, a lot of people don't realize that Nashville's WLIC was the top R&B station in the country for a number of years. And starting with a guy named Gene Noble, some students from TSU came by and said, would you please play some of our music? And he did, and got a good reaction, and continued all from there. Some of the big stars in Nashville. Cecil Gant had a national hit. Christine Kittrell was a fabulous vocalist. Never really had a big national hit though. And Little Richard, which you've heard of, there's an advertisement on WLIC advertisement that Little Richard does that I'm not going to play you today. It's in a longer version. I'm trying to crunch 6 hours of information down into 45 minutes. Hoss Allen and John Richburg, some of you may have heard about them from grandparents or what. They were legendary disc jockeys here in Nashville. John R. had a voice, he sounded black. He had one of those great gravel voices. And he goes to a banquet, and they were honoring R&B acts, and he walks in. He's one of the only white guys there. and they're all looking at him kind of suspicious, like, who is this guy? And he's sitting at the head table, and he gets up. I happen to have worked with John R. for a short while. He gets up, he starts talking, and the whole place just erupts in applause because he doesn't look like his voice. Nashville Jumps. This is Cecil Gant. This is an early hit, R&B hit on Bullet Records. And let me play a little bit of that. Incredible performer and one of the top sellers. It was one of his records that made Bullet Records profitable. Ernie Young and his Record Mart. Now, at that time, there's no downloads. You had to go to the stores to get the records. And Ernie Young had an appliance store. Appliance stores a lot of times sold records and sold record players and fixed things like radios. So anyway, he moves from having actually an appliance store with a largely black clientele, and they wanted R&B records, and so he kind of shifts into that. He operates some jukeboxes.